Hi, welcome all Chayalim to the Mitzvah Maven Mitzvah Shiurim, learning each mitzvah of the 613 mitzvahs from the Yahadus curriculum. In this year, we're going to be learning the mitzvahs of Yahadus Book 4, the book learned by the Chayalim in grade 7. Unit 157, page 12. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh, a mitzvah that tells us what we have to do. This mitzvah is mitzvahs tamidin b'chol yom, the mitzvah of offering the karban tamid daily. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, Shnayim layoyim oyla samim. The synopsis of this mitzvah is offer a karban tamid twice daily. The word tamid in Lashon HaKodesh means constant. This mitzvah is telling us that every single day of the year, Kohanim have to bring a special karban in the morning and a special karban in the afternoon. These karbanos are referred to as the karban tamid, the constant karban, since they were brought constantly every single day of the year. This mitzvah applies only to Kohanim, applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Unit 158, page 20. This page has two mitzvahs. The first mitzvah is a mitzvah saseh, a mitzvah that tells us what we have to do. This mitzvah is mitzvah hadlakas eish al hamizbeach b'chol yom, the mitzvah of lighting a fire on the mizbeach every day. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk eish tamid tukad al hamizbeach. The synopsis of this mitzvah is keep the fire burning on the mizbeach continually. This mitzvah tells us that the Kohanim are obligated to make sure that there is always a fire burning on the Mizbeach. This mitzvah applies only to Kohanim, applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The second mitzvah is a mitzvah sloi saseh, a mitzvah that tells us what we are not allowed to do. This mitzvah is shaloi lechabes eish me'al hamizbeach, not to extinguish the fire of the Mizbeach. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, Loi sichta. The synopsis of this mitzvah is do not extinguish the fire on the Mizbeach. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to extinguish any fire from the Mizbeach. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid's Eiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with malchus. Unit 159, page 26. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh, a mitzvah that tells us what we have to do. This mitzvah is mitzvah haramas hadesha, the mitzvah of removing ashes. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, the herim es hadesha. The synopsis of this mitzvah is remove ashes from the mizbeach. This mitzvah tells us that every day, a kohen is obligated to remove some of the ashes from the mizbeach. This mitzvah applies only to kohanim, applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Unit 160. In this unit, we're going to learn about a karban musaf, additional karbanis. These karbanis are called additional karbanis because they come in addition to the karban tamid that is offered every single day of the year. On certain special days of the year, we are commanded by Hashem to offer additional karbanis besides the regular karban tamid that is offered on those days as being part of the regular avodah in the Beis HaMikdash every single day of the year. In this unit, we're going to learn about all the different days of the year that we are obligated to offer karban musaf. Page 34. This page has three mitzvahs, and they are all mitzvahs aseh. The first mitzvah, as you can see by number 381 on the page, is karban musaf shel Shabbos. Offer a karban musaf every Shabbos. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is in the words of the pasuk. In the book, the words of the pasuk are above the name of the mitzvah. The words in the pasuk are V'yom HaShabbos shnei chavasim b'nei shana tamimim. This mitzvah tells us that on Shabbos we have to offer a karban musaf. As we explained before, karban musaf means that besides the karban tamid that we have to bring, we have to add more animals as a special carbon called carbon musaf. This mitzvah applies only to Kayanim. It applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The second mitzvah, as you can see by number 382 on the page, is mitzvah's carbon musaf b'chol Rish Chodesh. Offer a carbon musaf every Rish Chodesh. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. Again, the words in the pasuk are above the Hebrew and English names of the mitzvah. The words in the pasuk are Uverashi Chodshechem Takrivu Oilo LaHashem Parim B'nei Vakar Shenayim V'Ayil Echad Kivasim B'nei Shana Shiva. This mitzvah tells us that on Rish Chodesh we are commanded to offer additional animals as a carbon musaf. This mitzvah applies only to Kayanim, it applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The third mitzvah, as you can see by number 383 on the page, is mitzvah's carbon musaf kol shivas yemei HaPesach. Offer a carbon musaf every day of Pesach. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. Again, the words in the pasuk are above the Hebrew and English name of the mitzvah in the book. The words are V'hikravtem isha laHashem shivas yom. This mitzvah tells us that every single day of Pesach, we are obligated to bring additional animals as a carbon musaf. This mitzvah applies only to Kayanim, it applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Page 35. This page has 4 mitzvahs, and they are all mitzvahs aseh. The first mitzvah, as you can see by number 384 on the page, is mitzvah's carbon musaf b'geim Chag HaShavuos. Offer a carbon musaf on the day of Shavuos. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. Again, the words in the pasuk are above the Hebrew and English name of the mitzvah in the book. The words are V'yem HaBikurim V'hikraftem Oila Parim B'nei Vakar Shenayim Ayil Echad Shiva Chavasim B'nei Shana. This mitzvah tells us that on Shavuos we're obligated to offer additional animals as a carbon musaf. This mitzvah applies only to Kayanim, it applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The second mitzvah, as you can see by 385 in the book, is mitzvah's carbon mincha chadasha min achitim b'gei matzeres. Offer 2 loaves of leavened bread from the new crop as a mincha on Shavuos. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. Again, the words are above the Hebrew and English name of the mitzvah in the book. Mimeshvaisechem taviu lechem tenufa shtayim shnei esreinim seilas tehiyana chametz teyafena bikurim laHashem. This mitzvah tells us that on Shavuos, in addition to the regular animals of the carbon musaf, we are obligated to bring 2 loaves of wheat bread, which have been made into chametz. They have risen and have become chametz. We are obligated to bring these 2 loaves of bread as a carbon to Hashem, along with certain animal karbanos. This mitzvah applies only to Kayanim, it applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The third mitzvah, as you can see by number 386 on the page, is mitzvah's carbon musaf b'yom Rosh Hashanah. Offer a carbon musaf on Rosh Hashanah. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is on the words Uvachodesh Hashavi v'echad lachodesh v'asisem oilo l'reich nichayach laHashem par ben bakar echad ayil echad kivasu b'nei shana shiva t'mimim. This mitzvah tells us that on Rosh Hashanah we're obligated to offer additional animals as a carbon musaf. Again, when we say additional animals, we mean that they are in addition to the animals that are brought as the regular carbon tamid. This mitzvah applies only to Kaihanim, it applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only during the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The fourth mitzvah, as you can see by number 387 on the page, is mitzvah's carbon musaf b'yem asiri b'tishrei shehu nikra yom HaKippurim. Offer a carbon musaf on Yom Kippur. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. Again, the words are above the Hebrew and English names of the mitzvah. The words are v'asar lachodesh hashavi hazeh v'hikraftem oila laHashem reach nichayach par ben bakar echad, ayal echad, kivasa b'nei shana shiva. This mitzvah tells us that on Yom Kippur, we are obligated to offer additional animals as a carbon musaf. This mitzvah applies only to Kayanim, it applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Page 36. This page has two mitzvahs, and they are both mitzvahs aseh. The first mitzvah, as you can see by number 388 on the page, is mitzvahs carbon musaf v'chol yom yeshivas yemei chag hasukkos. Offer a carbon musaf every day of Sukkot. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. Again, the words of the pasuk are above the mitzvah name. The words are v'chamisha asar yom l'chedesh hashavi, v'chagoyisem chag laHashem shivas yomim, v'kraftem oila ishay reach nichech laHashem, parim b'nei vakar shalisha asar, elim shenayim kivasim b'nei shana arba asar. This mitzvah tells us that every single day of Sukkot we are obligated to offer additional animals as a carbon musaf. This mitzvah applies only to Kayanim, it applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only during the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The second mitzvah, as you can see by number 389 on the page, is mitzvah's carbon musaf begin Shemini Shel Sukkos. Offer a carbon musaf on Shemini Atzeres. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. Again, the words in the pasuk are above the mitzvah name. The words are Bayim Hashemini, V'kraftem oila ishay reach nichech laHashem, par echad, ayel echad, kivasim b'nei shana shiva, timinim. This mitzvah tells us that on Shemini Atzeres, which is the 8th day from the first day of Sukkot, we are obligated to offer additional animals as a carbon musaf. This mitzvah applies only to Kayanim, it applies only in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies only during the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Unit 161, page 44. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvah's carbon ha'emer shal sa'irim b'yem sheni shal Pesach. The mitzvah of offering a carbon of an omer of barley on the second day of Pesach. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, "V'haveisem es omer reishis ketzirchem." The synopsis of this mitzvah is offer the carbon omer on the second day of Pesach. This mitzvah tells us that on the second day of Pesach, we are obligated to offer a special carbon, which is made from an omer, a certain measurement, of barley flour. This mitzvah applies to the entire community. It applies only in Eretz Yisrael, and it applies only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Unit 162, page 52. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvah safiras ha'omer, the mitzvah of counting the omer. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, "U'sefartem lachem mimachras haShabbos, sheva Shabbosos tevimis tehiyena." The synopsis of this mitzvah is count 7 complete weeks from the day the omer is offered. This mitzvah tells us that we are commanded to count 7 complete weeks from the day that the carbon omer is offered in the Beis HaMikdash. As we learned previously, the carbon omer is offered in the Beis HaMikdash on the second day of Pesach. This mitzvah applies only to men, it applies in all places, and it applies at all times. Unit 163, page 60. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah sloi saseh, a mitzvah that tells us what we are not allowed to do. This mitzvah is shaloi lechel pesulei hamukdashim, not to eat unfit kachim. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, "V'loi seichal kol te'eva." The synopsis of this mitzvah is do not eat kachim that became unfit. Kachim literally means holy things. In this context, kachim means animals or birds that were designated to be offered as a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash. In certain situations, when certain things were done or were not done properly, then an animal or bird becomes unfit to be offered on the Mizbeach or to be eaten by the Kohanim or the owners. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to eat the meat of an animal or bird that was designated to be offered as a carbon and became pasul. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies at all times. If a Yiddish Oiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with malchus. Page 61. This page has 3 mitzvahs, and they are all mitzvahs leisase, mitzvahs that tell us what we are not allowed to do. The first mitzvah, by number 393 on the page, is shaloi lechel pigul, do not eat pigul. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words of the pasuk. The words of the pasuk are above the Hebrew name, the English name of the mitzvah in the book. This mitzvah is telling us that we're not allowed to eat pigul. Pigul refers to when a person had a wrong, improper thought while shechting or offering an animal or bird as a carbon. In certain situations, when he has certain thoughts, that animal becomes unfit and it becomes called pigul. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to eat pigul. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yiddish Oiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with kares. The second mitzvah, as you can see by number 394, is shaloi lechel noisar, do not eat noisar. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, and again, the words of the pasuk are above the English name of the mitzvah in the book. The words are va'ichlav aveinoi yisa. This mitzvah is telling us that we are not allowed to eat noisar. Noisar refers to meat of a carbon that was left over past the time that it is allowed to be eaten. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yiddish Oiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with kares. The third mitzvah, as you can see by number 395, is shaloi lechel b'sar kachim shenitma. Do not eat kachim that became tamei. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words of the pasuk, and again, the words of the pasuk are on top of the English name of the mitzvah in the book. This mitzvah is telling us that we are not allowed to eat the meat of a carbon if that meat became tamei. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yiddish Oiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with malchus. Page 62. This page has 2 mitzvahs, and they are both mitzvahs aseh. The first mitzvah, by number 396 on the page, is mitzvah sereifas b'sar kodesh shenitmu. Burn kachim that are tamei. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. Again, the words of the pasuk are above the English name of the mitzvah in the book. The words are v'habasar asher yiga b'chol tamei v'eish yisarif. This mitzvah tells us that we are obligated to burn the meat of karbanis that became tamei. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The second mitzvah, as you can see by number 397 on the page, is mitzvah sereifas noisar hakadoshim. Burn noisar. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. Again, the words in the pasuk are above the English name of the mitzvah in the book. V'hanoisar mibasar hazavach v'yem hashalishi v'eish yisarif. This mitzvah tells us that we are obligated to burn noisar. Noisar, as we explained earlier, is meat that was left over, meat of a carbon that was left over past the time when we are allowed to eat it. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Unit 164, page 68. This page has 1 mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah slo yisaseh. This mitzvah is shaloi yechal tamei min hakadoshim. A tamei person should not eat of kachim. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, "V'hanefesh asher techel basar mizevach hashlamim asher lahashem v'tum'asa yalav v'nichris hanefesh hahim me'ameha." The synopsis of this mitzvah is do not eat kachim if you are tamei. This mitzvah tells us that a person who is tamei is not allowed to eat from kachim. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid is over violates this mitzvah, he is punished with kares. Unit 165, page 74. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvah savaydas Yom HaKippur, the mitzvah of the avodah of Yom Kippur. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words of the pasuk V'zeis yavei aharon al hakodesh v'far ben bakar lechatas v'ayel lo'olam. The synopsis of this mitzvah is perform the avodah of Yom Kippur as described in the Torah. This mitzvah tells us that the Kohen Gadol is commanded to do the avodah of Yom Kippur on Yom Kippur as the avodah is described in the Torah. This mitzvah applies to the Kohen Gadol, it applies in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Unit 166, page 88. This page has two mitzvahs, and they are both mitzvahs lo yisaseh. The first mitzvah, by number 400 on the page, is shaloi la'avod b'kodshim, to not use something that was set aside as hektish. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words of the pasuk, lo yisavod b'vchar sheirecha. This mitzvah tells us that we're not allowed to work using an animal that was set aside to be offered as a korban. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies at all times. If a Yid is over violates this mitzvah, he is punished with malchus. The second mitzvah, by number 401 on the page, is shaloi ligzois es hakodshim, do not shear any wool from an animal that was set aside as hektish. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, v'lo yisa goyz b'cheret seinecha. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to shear, which means to cut off any of the hair of an animal that was designated to be offered as a korban in the Beis HaMikdash. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies at all times. If a Yid is over, violates this mitzvah, he is punished with malchus. Page 89. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvah tosefes chaimish la'oichel min ha'hektish oimayel boy, the mitzvah of adding chaimish to what was eaten or enjoyed from hektish. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, ve'es asher chatam min ha'kodesh yishalem, ve'es chamishisai yosef alav. The synopsis of this mitzvah is pay the value of a hektish object used for personal use plus an additional chaimish, 25% of the value, as a fine. This mitzvah tells us that if a person benefited or ate from an object which is hektish, which means this item belongs to the Beis HaMikdash, or was designated to be offered as a korban in the Beis HaMikdash, then that person has to pay back to the Beis HaMikdash the entire value of what he benefited or ate. Additionally, the person also has to add 25%, which is a quarter of the value that he benefited. He has to add that amount to what he is paying back to the Beis HaMikdash. For example, if someone ate fruits that belong to the Beis HaMikdash, and these fruits were valued at $100, then this person has to pay back to the Beis HaMikdash $100 for the value that he ate, plus another $25 as the chaymesh, the extra 25% that he has to pay. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Unit 167. In this unit, we're going to learn about the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach is a special korban that was offered on Erev Pesach and was eaten that night, the first night of Pesach. Page 98. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvah shechitas haPesach, the mitzvah of slaughtering the Korban Pesach. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk v'shachatu eisei kel kahal adas Yisrael bein harbayim. The synopsis of this mitzvah is shech the Korban Pesach on the 14th day of Nisan. This mitzvah tells us that we are obligated to shech a Korban Pesach on the day before Pesach, Erev Pesach, after midday. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid was mevatel he did not do this mitzvah saseh, and he did not offer a carbon pesach, he is punished with kares. Page 99. This page has two mitzvahs, and they are both mitzvahs lo saseh. The first mitzvah is shaloi nishchay tzeha pesach barba asar b'nisan ba'oid shachamitz b'rshus seidu, not to slaughter the lamb for the carbon pesach while there is still chametz in our property. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk lo yisizbach al chametz dam zivchi. The synopsis of this mitzvah is do not shech the carbon pesach as long as a participant in the carbon still has chametz in his possession. When offering the carbon pesach, usually many people joined together and it became a group, and that group had one carbon pesach that they would all join together and eat from. This mitzvah tells us that the group is not allowed to shech their carbon pesach if even one of the people in the group still has chametz in his possession. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid is over, he violates this mitzvah, he is punished with malchus. The second mitzvah is shaloi naniach emorei haPesach lipasel belina, not to allow the emurim of the carbon pesach to become possible by being left overnight. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk v'lo yolim chelev chagi ad boker. The synopsis of this mitzvah is do not leave the fat of the carbon pesach overnight. This mitzvah is talking about the emurim, the parts of the carbon pesach that are offered on the mizbeach. This mitzvah tells us that the kohanim are not allowed to leave these emurim overnight without putting them on the mizbeach to burn. This mitzvah applies to kohanim. It applies in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a kohen is over, violates this mitzvah, he receives no punishment. Page 100. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvah's Pesach Sheni barba asar b'iyar, the mitzvah of offering the Pesach Sheni on the 14th of Iyar. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk B'chodesh hasheni barba asar yem bein harbayim yasu oisai. The synopsis of this mitzvah is offer the carbon Pesach Sheni on the 14th of Iyar if you did not offer the carbon Pesach on the 14th of Nisan. This mitzvah tells us that if a man did not offer the carbon Pesach in its proper time on Erev Pesach, he is obligated to offer a carbon Pesach a month later, on the 14th day of the month of Iyar. This mitzvah applies only to men. It applies in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Unit 168, page 109. This page has two mitzvahs, and they are both mitzvahs aseh. The first mitzvah is mitzvah achilas b'sar haPesach, the mitzvah of eating the meat of the carbon Pesach. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words of the pasuk va'ochlu es habasar balayla hazeh. The synopsis of this mitzvah is eat the meat of the carbon Pesach according to all the halachas mentioned in the Torah on the night of the 15th of Nisan. This mitzvah tells us that we're obligated to eat the meat of the carbon Pesach on the night of Pesach, the first night, which is the night of the 15th of Nisan, and we have to eat it according to all the halachas that are mentioned in the Torah. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The second mitzvah is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvah's Pesach Sheni sheyoichal al matzos umreirim, the mitzvah of eating the carbon Pesach Sheni with matzah and maror. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk al matzos umreirim yechluhu. The synopsis of this mitzvah is eat the meat of the carbon Pesach Sheni on the 14th of Iyar. Earlier, we learned that if a man did not offer a carbon Pesach in its proper time, meaning on Erev Pesach, then he is obligated to offer a carbon Pesach a month after Pesach, on the 14th of Iyar. This carbon Pesach that he offers on the 14th of Iyar is called the carbon Pesach Sheni, the second carbon Pesach. In this mitzvah, we learn that the man has an obligation to eat the meat of the carbon Pesach Sheni on the night after the 14th of Iyar. This means that it's the night going into the 15th of Iyar. This mitzvah applies only to men. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Page 110. This page has 4 mitzvahs, and they're all mitzvahs lo yisaseh. The first mitzvah, by number 409 on the page, is Shaloi lechal ha-pesach na u'mevushal. Do not eat the carbon pesach if it is only partly roasted or if it is cooked in water. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. Those words are directly above the Hebrew and English name of the mitzvah in the book. The words are Al teichlu mimenu na uvashel mevushal b'mayim. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to eat the carbon pesach if it is only partly roasted or if it is cooked in water. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid is Eiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with Malchus. The second mitzvah, by number 410 in the book, is Shaloi lahaytzi mibisar ha-pesach chutza. Do not take the meat of the carbon pesach out of your group. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, and again, the words in the pasuk are directly above the Hebrew name of the mitzvah in the book, by the number 410 in the pasuk. The words are Leisaitzi min habayis min habasar chutza. This mitzvah is telling us that when eating the carbon pesach, we are not allowed to take the meat outside of the group who are eating it together. The meat of the carbon pesach must be eaten with a chabura, a group that was selected and organized before the carbon was shechted. Each group must sit and eat in its own area, away from other groups. We are not allowed to take the meat outside of the area or house where the group is sitting. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid is Eiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with Malchus. The third mitzvah, by number 411 in the book, is Shaloi lishbar etzem min ha-pesach. Do not break a bone from the carbon pesach. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk. You can find the words of the pasuk in the book on top of mitzvah 410 by the number 411 inside the words of the pasuk. The words are ve'etzem le'sishberu voy. This mitzvah tells us that we're not allowed to break a bone, even one bone, from the carbon pesach. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid is Eiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with Malchus. The fourth mitzvah, by number 412 on the page, is Shaloi lishbar etzem me'atzmais pesach sheni. Do not break a bone from the carbon pesach sheni. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words of the pasuk. The words you can find on top of mitzvah 412, the name in the book. The words are ve'etzem le'yishberu voy. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to break a bone from the carbon pesach sheni. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid is Eiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with Malchus. Page 111. This page has 3 mitzvahs, and they're all mitzvahs lo yisaseh. The first mitzvah, by number 413 in the book, is Shaloi nachal min ha-pesach li-Yisrael mishumad. Do not allow a Jew who serves idols to eat from the carbon pesach. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words of the pasuk, which you can find them on top of the mitzvah name in the book, is Kol ben neichar lo yochal boy. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to offer the meat of the carbon pesach to a Yid who serves avodah zarah. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid is Eiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with makas mardos. The second mitzvah, by number 414 on the page, is Shalei nachal min ha-pesach leger v'seishav. Do not allow a non-Jew who is a temporary resident or a hired hand to eat from the carbon pesach. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, which you can find on top of the Hebrew name in the book. The words are Taisha v'sacher lo yechal boy. This mitzvah tells us that we're not allowed to offer the meat of the Karban Pesach to any goy, even if the goy is a ger teishav, which means he is a resident in Eretz Yisrael after accepting to fulfill the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, the 7 mitzvahs that all goyim have to keep, or even if he is a sacher, which means he is a hired worker in your house. We're not allowed to offer the meat of a Karban Pesach to any goy. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The third mitzvah, by number 415 on the page, is Shelo Yechal Arel Min HaPesach. Do not eat the Karban Pesach if you are uncircumcised. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, which you can find on top of the mitzvah name in the book. The words are V'chal Arel Lo Yechal Boi. This mitzvah tells us that a yid is not allowed to eat from the Karban Pesach if he or anyone in his household, including his children or his male slaves, have not had a bris milah. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yiddish Eiver violates this mitzvah, he is punished with Malchus. Page 112. This page has 3 mitzvahs, and they are all mitzvahs leisase. The first mitzvah, by number 416 on the page, is Shaloi Lahaisir Mibisar HaPesach. Do not leave over the meat of the Karban Pesach until the morning. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is in the words of the pasuk, which you can find on top of the mitzvah name in the book. The words are V'loisei siru mimenu ad baiker. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to leave over any of the meat of the Karban Pesach until the morning of Pesach. Meaning, we are supposed to finish all the meat of the Karban Pesach by that night, and we're not allowed to leave over any of the meat until the morning. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yiddish Eiver violates this mitzvah, he receives no punishment from Beis Din. The second mitzvah, by number 417 on the page, is Shaloi Lahaser Kolom Mibsar Pesach Sheni L'Macharasei. Do not leave over any of the meat of the Karban Pesach Sheni until the morning. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, which you can find in the book on top of the mitzvah name. The words are Lo Yashiru Mimenu Ad Baiker. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to leave any of the meat of the Karban Pesach Sheni until the morning. Like the regular Karban Pesach, we are obligated to finish eating all the meat of the Karban Pesach Sheni that night, and we are not allowed to leave over any of the meat until the morning. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yiddish Eiver violates this mitzvah, he receives no punishment from Beis Din. The third mitzvah, by number 418 on the page, is Shaloi Lahaser Mibisar Karban HaChagiga Shenakrev B'Yem Yudalad B'Nisan Ad Yem HaShalishi. Do not leave over the meat of the Karban Chagiga of the 14th of Nisan until the 3rd morning after it was offered. This mitzvah is talking about the Chagigas Arba Asar, the special Karban Chagiga that was offered on the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach. In addition to the Karban Pesach that was offered on Erev Pesach, another animal was offered as a Karban called the Chagigas Arba Asar, and that animal was eaten the night of Pesach by the Seder, so that way we'd be full and satisfied when we come to eat the Karban Pesach. The meat of the Chagigas Arba Asar was allowed to be eaten the night of Pesach and the day of Pesach until Shkia sunset. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to leave the meat of the Karban Chagigas Arba Asar until the morning of the 2nd day of Pesach. This mitzvah applies to all people, and it applies in Yerushalayim, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yiddish Eiver violates this mitzvah, he receives no punishment from Beis Din. Unit 169, page 122. This page has 2 mitzvahs. The first mitzvah is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvah lehirois bebeis hamikdash b'shalish regalim, the mitzvah of being seen at the Beis HaMikdash on the 3 festivals. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, Shalish pa'amim bashana, yiroa kol zechorcha es pnei ha'adin Hashem elikei Yisrael. The synopsis of this mitzvah is come to the Beis HaMikdash on the Shalish Regalim and offer a carbon oila. This mitzvah tells us that we are commanded to appear before Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash on the first day of Pesach, the first day of Sukkot, and on the day of Shavuos. When we come and appear before Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash, we are obligated to bring with us an animal or a bird to be offered as a carbon oila. This mitzvah applies only to men. It applies in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. The second mitzvah is a mitzvah Shloi Saseh. This mitzvah is Shaloi La'alis L'Regel B'loi Karban Sheyihya Imanu Shenakri Vaysham. Not to go up to the Beis HaMikdash for the regalim without a carbon. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words of the pasuk, V'lo Yero Fanai Rekam. The synopsis of this mitzvah is do not come to the Beis HaMikdash for the Shalish Regalim without the proper carbon. This mitzvah tells us that we are not allowed to come to the Beis HaMikdash on the 3 Yamim Tovim mentioned in the previous mitzvah without bringing along an animal or a bird to be offered as a carbon oila. This mitzvah applies only to men, it applies in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. If a Yid was over violates this mitzvah, he receives no punishment from Beis Din. Unit 170, page 130. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvahs chagiga bar galim, the mitzvah of celebrating on 3 Yamim Tovim. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk Shalish Regalim Tachigli Bashana. The synopsis of this mitzvah is celebrate the Shalish Regalim by traveling to the Beis HaMikdash and offering a carbon shlamim. This mitzvah tells us that on the 3 Yamim Tovim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, we are obligated to offer an animal as a carbon shlamim in the Beis HaMikdash. This mitzvah applies only to men, it applies in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. Page 131. This page has 2 mitzvahs. The first mitzvah is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvah lismoyach bar galim, the mitzvah of rejoicing during the Shalish Regalim. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk V'samachta b'chagecha ata uvincha uvitecha v'avdecha v'amasecha v'halevi v'hager v'hayosem v'halmana asher b'sharecha. The synopsis of this mitzvah is rejoice during the Shalish Regalim by offering an additional carbon shlamim, eating the meat of the carbon shlamim, drinking wine, and wearing nice clothes. This mitzvah tells us that on the 3 Yamim Tovim, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, we are obligated to offer a special carbon shlamim, which is called Shalmei Simcha. We are commanded to eat the meat of that carbon shlamim, and we are commanded to drink wine and to do other things which increase our happiness, our simcha, on Yom Tov. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies at all times. The second mitzvah is a mitzvah Shloi Saseh. This mitzvah is Shaloi Lazev es haLeviyim milases lehem matanesehem umlasamcha b'regalim, not to abandon the Leviyim by withholding their gifts during the Shalish Regalim. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk Hishamer lecha pentazev es haLevi kol yamecha al ad masecha. The synopsis of this mitzvah is do not withhold the gifts for the Leviyim during the Shalish Regalim. In general, we are obligated to give to the Leviyim 1/10 of our produce that grows in our fields and orchards. Additionally, on Yom Tov, we are obligated to share our meat with the Leviyim, so that way they could have happiness and simcha on the Yom Tov. This mitzvah tells us that we're not allowed to abandon the Leviyim by not giving them the portions that they deserve from our produce that grows in our fields and orchards, and we're not allowed to abandon them by withholding from them and not give them portions of meat to make them happy on Yom Tov. This mitzvah applies only to men, it applies only in Eretz Yisrael, and it applies when most Jews live in Eretz Yisrael. If a Yid was over, violated this mitzvah, he receives no punishment from Beis Din. Unit 171, page 140. This page has 1 mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvahs hakel b'meitzoi shavius, the mitzvah of hakel after the 7th year. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, Hakel es ha'am, ha'anoshim v'ha'anoshim v'hataf, v'gercha asher b'sharecha. The synopsis of this mitzvah is gather at the beginning of the first year of the Shemitah cycle on the second night of Sukkot to hear the king read from the Torah. This mitzvah tells us that once every 7 years, in the year after Shemitah, during the Yom Tov of Sukkot, we are obligated to gather together, all Yidden, men, women, and children, to the Beis HaMikdash and listen to the king read certain parts of the Torah. This mitzvah applies to all people. It applies in the Beis HaMikdash, and it applies when most Jews are in Eretz Yisrael. Unit 172, page 148. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvah's kiddush b'chayris, the mitzvah of sanctifying your firstborn. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, Kol ha-b'char asher yivalid b'vkarcha v'tzenecha ha-zachar, takdish laHashem elikecha. The synopsis of this mitzvah is verbally set aside the firstborn male, b'char, of every kosher animal and give it to a kohen. This mitzvah tells us that if a yid owns a behema is a certain type of animal that includes cows, sheep, or goats. If a yid owns such an animal, and that animal has a baby, its first child, and that child is a male, then the yid is obligated to verbally, that means to say with his mouth, that that baby is holy, and he has to give that baby to a kohen. This baby is called a bechor, the firstborn. This mitzvah of verbally saying that the bechor is holy and giving it to a kohen applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies at all times. Page 149. This page has two mitzvahs, and they are both mitzvahs lo yisaseh. The first mitzvah is shaloi liftes bechor behema tahira, not to redeem a kosher firstborn animal. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, Ach b'char sher oy b'char kesef oy b'char eiz lo yisifta. The synopsis of this mitzvah is do not redeem a b'char animal. This mitzvah tells us that a yid is not allowed to sell a b'char animal or exchange it for another animal. Rather, he is obligated to give the actual b'char itself to a kohen. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies at all times. If a yid is over, violates this mitzvah, he receives no punishment from Beis Din. The second mitzvah is shaloi lechel b'char tamim chutz liYerushalayim, not to eat an unblemished firstborn animal outside of Yerushalayim. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, Lo yisucha lechel b'sharecha, u'v'cheres b'karcha v'tzeinecha. The synopsis of this mitzvah is a kohen may not eat an unblemished bechor outside of Yerushalayim, and a zar may not eat from it at all. This mitzvah is talking about a bechor tam, a complete and unblemished bechor. As we learned previously, when a firstborn male is born to a Jewish-owned animal, the yid who owns it has to give that animal to a kohen. If that animal is tam, which means it is complete, that it has no defects or blemishes that disqualify it from being offered as a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash, then the kohen has to offer this bechor animal as a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash. This mitzvah that we are learning now tells us that after the kohen offers it in the Beis HaMikdash and he's eating the meat, he is not allowed to eat the meat outside of Yerushalayim. Additionally, a zar, anyone who is not a kohen, is not allowed to eat from this bechor at all. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies at all times. If a yid is over, violates this mitzvah, he is punished with malchus. Unit 173, page 156. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah saseh. This mitzvah is mitzvahs ma'aser behema tahira b'chol shana, the mitzvah of separating ma'aser from all kosher animals each year. The makar, the source of this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, V'chol ma'aser bokar v'tzayin, kol asher yaver tachas hashavet, ha'asiri yihi yakedesh laHashem. The synopsis of this mitzvah is separate one out of every 10 kosher animals born each year and offer it as a carbon. This mitzvah tells us that we're obligated to separate one out of every 10 kosher animals that are born each year and offer it as a special korban called Meiser Behema. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies at all times. Page 157. This page has one mitzvah, and it is a mitzvah shlo yisaseh. This mitzvah is shelo limker Meiser Behema elulechel b'Yerushalayim. Not to sell the Meiser Behema, rather it should be eaten in Yerushalayim. The makar, the source for this mitzvah, is from the words in the pasuk, Lo Yigoel. The synopsis of this mitzvah is do not exchange an unblemished animal that was designated as Meiser Behema. When separating 1 out of every 10 animals for Meiser Behema, if the animal is unblemished, means that it is fit to be offered as a korban on the Beis HaMikdash, then a Yid is not allowed to sell or exchange that animal for money or a different animal. Rather, the Yid has to offer it as a korban and eat it in Yerushalayim. This mitzvah applies to all people, it applies in all places, and it applies at all times. If a Yid was over, violates this mitzvah, he receives no punishment from Beis Din.